izrazom modeliral ta dogodek. Kviz, ki smo ga popularno na plakatih imenovali in vino veritas 2. So hello, I shall be intervening into your existence now with the in vino veritas exams. Right? So that we get things settled with the microphones. To je na nek način ena taka neformalna zaokrožitev simpozija, Kierkegaard, existentializem in možnosti nove politike, v katerem bo sodelovalo 11 sogovornikov, ki so zaenkrat, da bi zagotovili njihovo večjo anonimnost, najavljeni preprosto s številkami. Pred njimi so kozarci vina, kot bi Grki rekli leokoinos, se pravi belo vino. Vmes, ker vino zelo dobro gre, da se še malo na latinščino navežem, semper viva quam creata, nekaj glasbe, je tukaj z nami Simon Šilec na saksofonu, ki se bo vključil po krogih. Skratka, čakajo nas 3 krogi vprašanj. V prvem krogu bo za vse sogovornike podano enako vprašanje, tak isto v drugem krogu, in v teh 2 krogih ima vsak odgovorcev 3 minute za svoj odgovor.
Je to prvi krog?
Ne, to še ni prvi krog.
A bo 2 minute za drugi krog?
Tako, vmes bodo odmori z glasbo in tudi po potrebi bomo naredili še odmor, če bo komisija ga potrebovala. Komisija, da ne pozabim, v sestavi Eva Marija Opresnik, kot predsednica, Erik Andersen na njeni levi oziroma na desni, odvisno s katerega konca gledate, in Marko Vitas, ki bo na moj znak, ker sem rekel, da ne bom vsega počel sam, skrbel za konce in zaključke krogov. Umil sogovornikom ga bom prebral v slovenščini in angleščini, da si naša prečudovita tolmačka v vitrini v trenutek odpočije. Potem bomo naredili natanko 3 minute premora, da vsi zajamete sapo, in potem bomo s tistim, ki se bo čutil najbolj pripravljenega, ki bo najprej dvignil roko ali pa se javil, začeli in tako naprej. Vsak ima 3 minute in neposredne replike na sogovornike v prvem, drugem in tretjem krogu niso dovoljene. Razen, če se moderator odloči drugače in če začuti ogenj debate. Bom skrbel za logistiko. Torej, prvo vprašanje. Ali trditev, provokacija, izvleček, nastavitev mišljenja. Gre pa takole. Bi se strinjali s trditvijo, da biti odprt pomeni biti zmožen ljubezni in da ljubezen terja samo odprtost? Če je vaš odgovor da, kako se potem krščanska zapoved ljubi svojega bližnjega nanaša na nekoga z drugačnim etičnim ter ali religioznim ozadjem? Once again, would you agree with the statement that to be open means to be able to love and that love requires one's self-exposure? If your answer is yes, how does the Christian commandment, love thy neighbor, relate to someone with a different ethnic and religious background? Breathe in, breathe out, and when I shall gaze upon Darko, torej ko bom pogledal na... Prosim.
Lepa slovenska misel pove tole. Ljubezen je bila, ljubezen še bo, ko tebe in mene na svet več ne bo. Ko se v nas oglasi občutje potreba po ljubezni, začutimo neko mero zmožnosti dajanja. To me spominja na tista lepa 16. leta, ko človek začuti moč kot atlas, da si celo zemeljsko kroglo naloži na ramena. Lepo pri ljubezni je to, če je res to moč dajanja, da ona svojo spontanostjo preprosto je tu, je brez povabila. Treba je dati čas in prostor, da preide iz zaljubljenosti v ta pravo ljubezen udajanje. Ne zamenjujmo pa tega, kar je zelo pogosto patološko, zaljubljenost od ljubezni. Veste, zaljubljenost je tako kot gripa. Pride nenapovedano, nenačrtovano, nas popade, si nas daje kot gripa, kot mrha in odide včasih tudi s težkimi posledicami. Končala.
Najlepša hvala prvi sogovornici. Upam, da po gripah ne pride pljučnica, ampak večna ljubezen. Naslednji kandidat, prosim.
Pogosto sprašujejo ljudje, kdo je naš bližnji v krščanstvu.
Mikrofon.
Aha, pardon.
Aha, ok. Bom še enkrat šel. Pogosto vprašanje ljudi je, kdo je naš bližnji, če hodimo za Jezusom. Odgovor je preprost. Bližnji je vsak. To je prvi aksiom krščanstva. Bližnji je vsak. Druga stvar, ki bi želel povedati, ker smo ravno na Kierkegaardovem simpoziju, da je Kierkegaard rekel, da je posebnost krščanstva to, da je ljubezen dolžnost. Ljubezen je dolžnost. Ampak ob tem je potrebno povedati, da v krščanskem smislu tisti, ki ljubi, ni dovolj, da samo daje, ampak mora dati srcem. To o tem govori prilika v gostiji za uboge, kjer je rečeno, da je treba za uboge, za marginalizirane, za sev, kot da so prišli tvoji najljubši sorodniki. To pomeni, da ljubezen v krščanskem smislu ni zgolj dejanje, ampak da moraš dati srcem. To dejanje s srcem je pogosto zelo težko in zahteva transformacijo, preobrazbo srca. Kot je rekel profesor Andrej, danes tudi na družbeni ravni je govoril o metamorfozah in to mislim, da se bi dalo uskladiti.
Najlepša hvala. Naslednji govornik. Prosim.
Mikrofon.
Ne, čakaj.
Tomas se je javil.
Just go and speak.
Yeah, it's okay, it's working.
Ljubezen do zaporedja ni najvišja ljubezen.
So I would not begin love with some theoretical position. I would look at my friend and to that person's immediate requirements. It may be poor, or you may need some encouragement, you may need a word of affirmation. So as you begin to interact with him, positive affirmation of the person, you notice that he is yourself, he or she is yourself. You discover yourself in the other person because he reacts to you more or less the way you would be doing in another context. And so look at the person with admiration, positive qualities that person has. And therefore, all of a sudden you find that the certain amount of good qualities that person has begins to grow or express itself. But unfortunately, we are limited beings. When I interact with others, a little bit of flattering it may sound when I praise him or something, but the reality is that person has its defects as well. I'm very happy with what you have said or the way you interact, especially after a period of time. immediately they are very happy, but when we interact a little longer, a little negative things will come up. And then you discover you are yourself, you would have done the same, you are losing your patience, you are contradicting your statements, and so on. And it is in this context we say, how do we shape our future? Particularly the other person. I would address not only his needs, but his hopes, his dreams, especially when they are young people, senior people, looking into young people, younger generation, students, and so on. Then you find that you did dream in the same way, but maybe other dreams, and you have the same, similar hopes, maybe other hopes, but you also had disappointments. Then you find this young man is disappointed. Very good teachings are there, but they are not living it. Others are not living it, the teachers are not living it, religious authorities are not living it, intellectuals are not, they are saying good things, but they are not. So in that particular context, how do we begin to, we ought to reflect together in such a way, there is an explanation for everything. We can understand others who are far away from us, neutral persons, authorities, seniors, philosophers, intellectuals, and so on. And in the context of that, confirm their dreams, confirm their hopes. And I thought that would be one way of showing our love for that person. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paula.
Bom kar nadaljeval s tem, kar sta moja predhodnika. Torej, sam razumem ljubezen kot radostno dajanje drugemu, samega sebe drugemu. In če to povežem s Jezusovo zapovedjo, ljubi svojega bližnjega kot samega sebe, alternativni prevod je ljubi drugega tako, kot da je on, kot da si ti on. Oba prevoda sta možna. Je to jasno, da to ne mogoče doseči, če nimaš te možnosti radostnega dejanja drugemu. Da pa imaš to, moraš biti pa najbrž radostno zavest o samem sebi. Tisti, ki pa je poln predsodkov, očitkov, strahu pred drugim, tega ne more doseči. Nima niti radostne zavesti od sebi, še manj od drugemu, torej ni sposobni ljubezni. In prvi korak pri ljubezni je izstopiti iz teh načalnih krogov sovraštva do samega sebe. Kako priti do radostnega bivanja, sobivanja obeh. To je zame temeljno vprašanje.
Hvala.
Paula je bila.
Tako je bil, vrščen in potem naslednja.
Thank you. When I think about love, I usually want to put myself in the perspective of a child. When children feel love, and that's before they can have a very full concept of what it means, they understand that they have to be together with the one that is proxim, with the one that is proxim. This notion of who to give love is just a matter of proximity. It doesn't have to be only physical, but in their imagination or in their thoughts. And in this sense, it doesn't have to be a grown-up or a bird, or it doesn't matter the object. The real thing is that they are not conscious of the needs of others either. Love is like a present. A child, when a child loves, he doesn't have to get the world better because he is confident that the world is already fulfilled or good. And in that sense, the love a child can give, which I think is the most pure one, is just above all a present. A present that somebody receives if he's ready to. It's like what he says, the ones that have ears can listen, and the ones that don't just simply do not receive the present, but it's there.
Thank you very much. Just to remind you and to vedel, da se mi bo to pogosto dogajalo. Kar naprej samo eno malenkost povem, da smo od številke 2 na številko 5, potem 4, 3, samo da držimo statistiko. In zdaj smo pri številki, naslednji govorec je 6.
Well, I'm thinking whether to speak in English, just because that way I will be sure that the translator will not love me so much that it will soften what I'm going to say.
Brodskim in Hikmetom, ali
Yes.
dobljeno ali dobljeno.
So, my first sentence will be, love is trouble. Love is dialectics. Love is basically based on a desire to be loved by the other. So, love is something which in the social context becomes an egoistic drive. But as a philosopher, I have to think that love has a history, love maybe has a future, and love was an agency of all sorts of changes. When the people got through this terrible dialectics of love, which produces, on the one hand, desire for the other, and on the other hand, the hate of the other. So I would say that there was always this call for universal love, and there was always the problem how this universal love would become singular love, love for the one, to the singular person. So I will give just one case, and that is the problem that we have now with the Christian love. Luckily enough, we have a Catholic Pope who somehow tries to save the meaning of the Christian love. But what is actually happening is what Etienne Balibar says, that Europe of today is going to be judged in the future history as the community of collective crime. Europe of today is killing thousands, tens of thousands of people in the Mediterranean Sea who are trying to migrate to Europe. No? And this is the Christian agency doesn't work in this respect. I cannot see Christian love really active in this field of saving poor people who were deprived of everything and try to follow their illusion, their love for Europe. Thank you.
Hvala. Se sprašujem, ja, ali je med kohezivno pa univerzalno ljubeznijo, katera je manj egoistična. Številka 9.
Did you like the direct question?
Would you like to hear the question?
I remember the question. Okay, I can repeat the question. The question was very simple, and it was a direct question answering for a yes or no answer.
Yes.
And then it was stated, should the answer be yes, to give an argument in a specific way. The answer was, does love require exposure? And then it was
Microphone, please.
and then
It's on, just a little closer.
And then it was added, should the answer be yes, to provide an argument to which extent, like in a theological sense, how that relates to this duty of loving thy neighbor. I've yet to hear a yes or no answer, but I've heard a lot of magnificent theories and theological exposures. I would say no, because then I can structure the argument the way I want. So I just say, no, it does not, unless what you're giving, if you were to lose it, it would cause you such harm that you cannot live. That way I'm including love for one's child, love for one's neighbor, or love for one's lover. Yeah, I don't think I need to say anything else.
Torej, da od zdaj naprej zaostrimo pogoje, najprej začnemo z besedo da in ali z besedo ne in potem razložimo svoje stališče. Številka 10. Number 10.
Okay, the question for love and to love your neighbor, for me too, is a bit problematic and complex. There's a story Kang gave us about the relationship of man and woman, and the man loves the woman and he tries to do the best, but what if the woman doesn't want this? What if the woman doesn't want this kind of love? Maybe she likes his sexual activity, but not the other things. But he tries to do his best. So in this case, maybe this absolute good becomes violent against the woman, because just one perspective, one side. The other one as well, Lacanian inspired. If you do an analytics, psychoanalysis, and you get acquainted and learn to accept your own deficiencies, your own lack, then you possibly learn to accept the other as the other is, with all his deficiencies, with all his lack as well. And if love has any meaning in a metaphysical sense, then I would go this way. And the third point, intercultural relations, I wouldn't. I love Chinese culture, I love Indian culture, I love the Asian cultures, or some Native Americans, but it's not a love in this metaphysical sense. It's not unselfish. So I wouldn't talk of love to other cultures, but to work with other cultures may inspire you and may give you different perspectives, and those different perspective to yourself as well as your own culture, and that's why it's as well a precondition for accepting or living in together.
So your answer is yes, but without the ethnic or religious.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
To put it very broadly, of course. Številka 11.
Now, just to make this obligation, yes, but let's see. I sense here a politically charged question, which I believe that most of the presenters before me avoided, which is wrong. But we'll come to this later on. First of all, that there's an really important term which we forgot. It's imagination. Now, what love is? Love is necessarily connected with imagination. The way I interpret, for example, Kant's moral philosophy is that it is to give us a moral image of the world. It is possible to see, of course, the objects of desire in a common world through, to say, the exactment of a kind of mechanism of control, a kind of, to say, normative standard on which to judge. Now, the thing is, love, and the subject of love, the subject of attraction, is both a physical and embodied person, but also it is a fictional object. And the thing with it, this is a diametrical process here. It's always a fiction, and which transforms us in a way. This fiction transforms us, and the thing is, love as such is struggle. It needs to be interpreted in that way. So while most of the presenters before me said that, of course, there's a need to live in harmony, to love thy neighbor. These are all great, but this is not true. Love is struggle. Love is also something that exposes us to dangers of the world, even dangers of another or dangers in the world. Now, these are well-intentioned beliefs, but they still cover some kind of Eurocentric and some kind of, say, this status quo attitude, which has been a source of so many problems and has also covered up the inability to really, really make something, some advancements when it comes to the meeting of cultures, meeting of different religions, which is now, especially in migrant crisis and so on, more and more important. So being together means struggle in a conflict, because of course, reaching harmony is exposing oneself to the others, to the judgment of the others, and seeing in the other not just his best attitudes, but also his worst. So this is the problem. This is the problem of how we can act in harmony. We need to go through this conflict of recognition. Recognition of the other is always within a struggle. So for that, it is imagination, the ability to see the other, but also ability to see oneself in the other, as Hegels already presented once more. So thank you.
You go ahead. Okay. You go ahead.
Thank you. I think, sorry. I think this is a very good question for us to discuss, and I think got some enlightenment from the answers. I think generally love is a special feeling for life. Actually, not only happened in human being, but also happened in all the animals and some others. But especially we think that's a special feeling for human being, because actually from the generation, for animals, their parents may help the children grow up, but for human being, there is a special phenomenon. They go back to their parents. I think that in that of this relationship, actually they put into different individuals, different families, different groups, different nations, and different, I think, class, even in same, in the very complex situation. So I just asked for Christian, actually. In China, not so many people be Christian, but we still believe there is a love. Confucius asked for the benevolence, actually. He asked for a special theory for benevolence. And what is real benevolence is love people. But I think this is still needed to discuss, because if the world is be loveful, because the world is so complex, if the precondition is everything is good, is beautiful, is virtual, is moral, we love it. But actually in the society still have evil thing, bad thing, worse thing, and many things. So I think love is a kind of special truth. It an attitude to different kind of social phenomena. Then we have some special admire, we agree, we support, we follow, and we got the consensus from this end. And if we face the very bad and the very complex situation, love is an attitude to against the very bad thing, to influence and damage the society and some others. So in China, actually, I talked that golden rule. One golden rule is, there are two different meanings. One is you can only stand the right way, and I explained this this morning. But actually, another thing is only give your friend what you like, and if you don't like, don't give it. That's a kind of special love. So I think even now we should face any concept with complex thinking models and make sure what's the precondition. Then we choose the different condition, where are we stand, and what is really can let the human being become more progress and they can go to a bright future. I think this is really the art to discuss. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have no argument to make, but I do want to put together a few reminders. So, one reminder is this, is that if you have a chance to love, you should go for it. Why? Well, take Erikson. Erikson considers love to be one of the ego strengths and a major one, and a very early strength that is developed and which others would really develop. And it is for that reason, I say if you have a chance to fall in love and to love someone, you should take that chance, grab it, and get to know something about yourself. So that's one reminder. A second reminder has to do with the fact that I'm English speaking. That's my native language. And I know this language quite well. And we have only one word to describe that kind of desire or whatever it is that happens between two people. And that's it's the word love. But in order to make clear what is it that we mean, we draw on other languages, and that we draw on the Greek or Latin, and it's important for us to make some distinctions. I know personally that languages can create a great deal of problems, especially people who are English speaking and have just one word to express a range of meanings. So when we begin to talk about love, and since I haven't drunk as yet, I can still be somewhat a little professorial and suggest or remind that there are at least 3 words that English-speaking people, educated English-speaking people will draw on to make some distinctions. And one of them is eros, and that has to do with what we might translate loosely as sexual love, attraction for the opposite sex. So eros. A second one is philios, which is kind of brotherly love, and which gives us the word Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia in the United States. So it's a general kind of love, as opposed to eros. But then there's a third kind, and that has to do more with a kind of Christian tradition, and it is agape. And this is very different from the 2 that have gone before. And it is this agape that Kierkegaard talks about, and that is connected with Christian love. And so I will close this reminder by just citing what Kierkegaard says, and that is that to love the other, and there's been much talk about loving the other, and I'm not very clear who this other is. But Kierkegaard seems to be very clear, and that is to love the other in the Christian sense means to love the ugly ones. And here this has nothing to do with revelation or divine command or anything like that. Kierkegaard was very Socratic with this. And that is that he is in the tradition of Socrates, his teacher. And that is that Christian love involves loving the people who I can't stand, the ugly ones. Those are my remarks.
To je bil, če se ne motim, zadnji v prvem krogu. In zato, da privoščim, vidim, da so vsi zelo vešče in pridno pustili svoje in vino veritas napitke pri miru. Zdaj prihaja čas, ko jih lahko z nekaj krinke použijejo. Simon izvaja prosto improvizirano ali free improvised music. Kateri način, zato ker je zelo kratko, evo, Simon to bo zate uvod na tvojo točko. Kateri način bi po vašem mnenju najbolj etično ustrezal vzpostavljanju odprte družbe? Revolucija, protest, reforma, tri pike. Or, what means would you find ethically suitable in establishing an open society? Revolution, protest, reform, or?
Transformation.
So, once again, what means would you find ethically suitable in establishing an open? 2 minutes. I was a little bit lenient, but I won't be that much anymore.
I find that in an open society, the ethically suitable way to perform the communication between those in power and those who are not in power are the three of them. In fact, the three of them are different ways of communicating. It can be revolutionary in the sense of existential revolution, which so much have talked about here in our Kierkegaardian symposiums. Of course, the reform has to be accorded, that's the theme of the communication between those in the government and those not in the government. And in fact, I do think that everybody should have a place in the government with different tasks. And protest is the main issue to get things better. Only that protests don't have to be violent. And it depends really on the commitment everybody has in society as to make protest evolutional towards a better good. That I think that's the aim of everyone that wants to revolve the government or the ideas, or reform them, or protest about them. It's just a matter of how involved they are in the process. But I think they are facets of the same communication event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was number 3. We go to number 11.
Thank you for this question. First of all, protest I don't see as basically on the same level as a revolutionary reform, which I will compare, but it is basically a means of achievement. It's new liberties. But of course, as Professor Ouyang already certainly stated before, violence can be avoided in achieving some kind of new liberties, new politics for the world. It can be avoided, as I already claimed in my paper on Benjamin and Minke, but the thing is, of course, the way, like we have seen in Peterson and Žalec debates, right? For example, this is a problem with new critical theory in the 21st century. It is far too reformist in a way. It is a reformist not just in, say, the actual way of politics, it is reformist in the way of how it still loses the sight that kind of normative revolution still must be pursued, even though we know it's not realistic in today's world. So that's a kind of spiritual, it deals kind of spiritual limits to our understanding of the world, especially because we can't recognize the real processes behind ideologies of the world. And see, this is the main problem, of course. We are living in a network of ideologies. Mannheim stated, basically in his famous Mannheim paradox, we don't know where the neutral zone from which we can judge the world relation really lies. We are always formed by ideology. So the key question is, can we make something with it if we just want to reform it? We go into the same conservative status quo circle. We need to find the position on which we can judge. And this is a revolution in itself, because by finding this position, we already do something in a cultural sense, as a kind of cultural revolution, kind of renaissance of our language, of our thought. So this is my point. as Zizek, for example, he was still limited in his approach because he believes that, well, capitalist society cannot be avoided right now, but it can. It may not be materialized, but it can be pursued. So that's the thing. We are lost in the status quo of just confirming reforms and reforms and reforms. There can be revolutions, at least in our minds. And that's the most important thing for the start. Later on, we can talk of how this revolution can be realized. But just to be clear, to conclude, we are not talking about violent revolution like October Revolution 100 years ago was. We are talking about the revolution in our ethics, in our norms. We are talking about the revolution of how we perceive the relations in the world should be.
You are all quite nice with me on time, I have to stress. Thank you very much. Number 9, please.
Yeah, so the person who wrote this question, like he or she is a little bit unclear, because I mean, I would also like to know what they mean when they say that something is ethically suitable. I think it's a bit sort of fuzzy. Does it mean that how I act or think or how I go about is not worse than what is, like, you know, going on around me? Basically, I mean, if you just tell things, say things that like they are, like the system we're living in is violent. I mean, there is more and more division of property. I mean, the status of the like environment is just going to hell, and basically, you know, it just gets more and more shown to us that money make people do funny things, and and I mean, every 2 pennies that pass through our hands, one is getting stolen somehow, you know, because the system is very complex. So, I mean, yeah, so my problem is capitalism. I mean, and I don't agree that, you know, that you should say that that a revolution or strive or that it must never or can never be violent, because, you know, the situation is violent, and we don't know, like, if we say never and we take that word to what it means, then we mean then in all circumstances, in all places, and what, no matter what happens, we're just going to refrain from violence. I mean, sometimes violence has been necessary, and sometimes it has produced a progression. So, but otherwise, yes, I say we should ethically suitable. Then okay, then we need revolution of the people. No, what was the first one? Protest of the people, revolution of the mind, reform of the system. Thanks.
Thank you. Number 8.
As I said in my paper, my answer is neither revolution, neither thought, but global metamorphosis on different levels, on extension and intention through the anti-fetishist movement of active solidarities.
Number 6. Okay. Štyrka 6.
Yeah. Well, I would also agree with those who said these are different levels. On one level revolution, on the other level reform and protest. But I would, of course, I would answer revolution is the right means of opening the society, but one should bear in mind that there were many meanings of this notion. First of all, we have Copernican revolution, which means circling around something, always returning to the point, from the point of departure. Then there was, for instance, French Revolution, which which thought of itself as being Copernican revolution, but then it proved that it was something else, and so on, until the revolution of 1968, which even didn't think of itself as a revolution, but actually it brought, by the way of, as I pointed out in my paper, by the way of so-called indirect politics, brought into the world many changes, at least in the part of the world. And these changes comprised many things, among others, for instance, sexual revolution, which meant women liberation, for instance. It meant, then there was changing of lifestyles. There was something which, in one word, could be called opening of the society. But saying that revolution is the main means, according to Alain Badiou, one should think that you cannot really organize revolution as the event. You can only play out the revolution when the event happens. And what the event is the total interruption, total surprise, coming of something new, a new break in the continuity, something totally unexpected. And that will be the revolution. But until then, we have protest and reform. Although about reform, I'm a little bit skeptical. Depends on who is doing this reform. Usually those who are in power and who tries to save their staying in power through these motions of so-called reform. Thank you.
Najlepša hvala. Številka 4 in potem številka 2. 4, 2, 4, 2, 5. In this order.
Myself, sorry. So if revolution depends on the meaning of the word revolution. Pope Francis spoke about revolution of tenderness. Revolution of tenderness. There is a lot of room for this. But I have often said when there are problems, there are two ways of responding to it. One is reaction, the other one is response. Reaction invites reaction. Whatever kind of revolution you are speaking about, if it is negative, it is violent, it is enforcing, there is use of force, it just invites use of force. And if it is too feeble for resistance, resistance will come. Resistance is being built up. So this is an infallible formula in social affairs. While this response is an intelligent approach to a problem, well thought out. So any problem should stimulate your thought rather than merely your emotion. Emotion is also a part of reality, but should stimulate your thought. So protest alone will not be helpful, in my opinion, unless it is intelligently planned and responsibly carried out, whatever form of protest. So I combine these two, intelligence and responsibility, as very important combination of responsible, therefore not reform of any kind, takes into consideration the various interests, diverse interests of communities, groups and forces at work. So what I would leave space for thought in reform or for protest, and kind of revolution that is not a harmful kind of revolution, violent or something, leave space for thought and stimulate responsibility. When we do these two, in my opinion, that kind of a reform, that kind of a protest, that kind of a revolution is perfectly ethical. Revolution not therefore in the violent sense, but radical change. And if any structure remains firm and rigid, will not change easily, revolution will come by itself. Ethical or not, it will come by itself. Whether in the political situation or other structures, if it is too rigid, if we allow space for thought, space for change, intelligent change, responsible change, gradually then we'll avoid radical changes also.
Najlepša hvala. Ko sem že imel občutek, da smo začeli vleči dramaturške črte med tremi pojmi, revolucija, protest in reforma. Vidim, da se počasi te črte spet odpirajo, radi pa samo spomnim, da je na koncu bila še besedica ali. Tako da niso te tri besede svete. Prosim, številka dve. Majhen medkin se pravičujem.
Zame je etika kot orientir za vsakega človeka v tem kratkem življenju, ki ga živimo med rojstvom in smrtjo. Etika naj nikdar ne bo človekova protinarava, etika naj bo človekova druga narava, naj bo onaravljena, in to nam lepo kažejo že starodavne etike. Kot take so bile pa celo zmožne takih radikalnih sprememb kot življenje skupnosti, ki se imenuje država, ki presega krvno-sorodstvena razmerja patriarhalnega doma, svet si ustvari zakone in te tudi izpolnjuje, spoštuje. Etika je nekoč pomenila lepo dušo, sisteme človeških odnosov. Doživela je čudovito transformacijo v etiko biti, ki razvija po vzoru enega Alberta Švajcarja najširšo odgovornost za vso svetovno bit in življenje v njej. Mi danes iščemo tak orientir v zlatem pravilu, to je pa nekaj, kar dobimo v vseh časih, v vseh kulturah, in to je lahko nek minimum za življenje v odprti, svobodni družbi. Samo svobodni ljudje, posamezniki pa lahko ravnajo moralno. In zato takrat, ko pride do upora, do revolucije, pa spet moram reči, da je v vsakem uporu in revoluciji najbolj etično to, da kaže na ljudi, ki razvijajo zmožnost za preživetje, ki želijo ostati in obstati, tako kot moj mali narod v času druge svetovne vojne z uporništvom, z partizanstvom, ki se je oprlo eni najbolj zlovešče angažiranih sil fašizmu in nacizmu. Hvala.
Najlepša hvala. Številka 5.
Ja, jaz se v veliki meri strinjam z Andrejem in s tem četrto možnost ali, se pravi preobrazba. Če jemljem zgled iz zgodovine, neke, bi rekel, lahko revolucije ali korenite spremembe, je to Gandhi. On je dosegel zelo pravično stvar, ki je vključevala različne ljudi, brez izključevanja, z veliko spoštovanja do različnih kultur in njegova revolucija je šla od spodaj navzgor, bottom up. Od njega samega, ker je on doživel prevrat, potem pa, kot je zapisal v svojih čudovitih spominih, ki jih imamo tudi v slovenščini, spremenite sebe in videli boste, kako nalezljivo je to. To je moj zgled. Pravičnost, vključevalnost, spoštovanje, solidarnost in ne nasilje. Taka revolucija da. Če je to sploh revolucija, mislim pa, da je to bolj metamorfoza, kot je rekel Andrej.
Najlepša hvala. Številka 6, mislim, da je danes srednja. Number 6. Pardon, številka 7, se pravi. Ja. Zdravim.
My answer is very simple. All options are on the table, and depending on how you read the situation. And the question then is how one is to read a situation. Power speaks to power. But what makes the situation ethical? And that is that there's a very simple formula that we all know. Do no harm. Do no harm. The question is, how are we going to do no harm? In the exercise of the options. Which option is strategic? And it becomes very personal, it becomes something that has to do with what happens in you internally. And Plato tells us that becoming a person, becoming educated, has to do with that turning around of the eye, vision. And Kierkegaard says that too. There's a turning around, internal kind of turning around in terms of education. And it is in that context, the context of turning around, that we decide what option is going to be exercised. For to exercise an option requires understanding what's happening and what's being done to us in terms of what is happening and what kind of response is required. And we can only know that when we are in this situation. And we keep in mind that an open society has its enemies. And to think of any other thing, that option X will work without going through these processes. And keeping in mind that an open society has its enemies. You're back to square one.
Thank you very much. We only got number 1 and 10.
Yes.
So, number 1.
Okay, thank you. This is also a very good question. I think there are some key words here. First is, what is the open society? I think this is actually the key point. Karl Popper, he wrote Open Society and its Animals. And he asked to protect or open the situation of the open characteristics for especially modern time, and criticized all the society, it close the mind and also close the political system, and also limited people's behavior. I think another thing is about maybe open society is just a situation. So I agree with that. First, how can we define this? And the 3 choice, why we have such kind of choice? Because different problem, contradiction. Then you deal with such kind of problem happened in the society. So, recently actually there is a very strong debate about Fusan. You may know that. I think born in Japan and now in US, he had a very good. It's an important book about the end of history and the master man in the world. I think that he announced that the society stopped at his history. History is contemporary capitalist freedom and liberty. But after 20 years about, he said, no, we are wrong. We are going to go to a wrong way. The capitalist country already, almost all countries try to find a new way. So what is open society? That's the key point for us. Then we can decide what can we choose. Revolution happened also in the history, in ancient and also in modern time, gave us, especially human being, modernization. But you cannot only revolution, then that will destroy human being. And the protection, you cannot only protect you because it still need, see if the society is worthwhile to protect and also reform. China, we passed the 3 stages, different kind of choice. That first, I think for us discuss such kind of problems, first you should define what situation, and the main value or whole aim for us is to promote the progress of society and human being. So what we need, what we choose, then what we promote, then what we got. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last, number 10.
Okay, for me, first of all, it's important that openness is only, first of all, openness regarding oneself. So I mentioned in my presentation Lacan's acting in conformity with one's desire. I think he follows Breton in his Amour Fou. He says that it's all about keeping open the path of desire. So similar, it is totally different, but a similar idea is in Buddhist. You will find in Buddhist philosophy in this gradual way of enlightenment. They say something about wiping away the dust of the mirror, so cleaning the mirror. It's a permanent act to do this for both, I think. The second point is openness, of course, has something to do with pluralism. So for this, knowledge is important. Experience, the changing of perspectives, very important. And as a third point, and maybe answering the question, I like irony. And irony, I think, is a kind of protest. So I think that's why I wouldn't call it protest. Yeah, I would prefer irony. But if I have to answer your question, then the little best thing would be protest.
Najlepša hvala. Zdaj bi prosil, ker je to tik pred zadnjim razredom, da vsi, ki imajo tako zdaj zvonec, drugega kroga je bil konec, trima je bila popolnoma naključna, in res je bila, da vsi dvignete svoje kozarce, tudi če ne pijete, da ne bi koga silili, da se razumeli, da sklenete. In si nazdravite pred zadnjim dejanjem. Nazdravje vsem. Če kdo še nima, naj povem.
Prazne kozarce imajo,
Pomagal?
noben jim ne naliva.
Se sem potrudil, da jih mislim na sredini.
Not water, wine.
Tako, zdaj v zadnji rundi tako. Predsednica komisije predlaga in mislim, da se komisija v celoti soglaša s tem, da bomo v zadnji rundi, zato da smo bolj natančni, do zdaj sem bil malo odpuščajoč glede časa, ker vas nisem hotel prekinjati, sem stavil to, kar se mi zdi v redu, ampak za zadnjo rundo, ko imamo tukaj ta magični klobuk, bo Marko po vsaki minuti stisnil po zvoncu. So the bell will be heard every minute, and you will have precisely 1 minute. So we go 3, 2, 1. It's a countdown. It's like rocket science, not far away. Naključna vprašanja, tukaj so pred vami, vsak izvleče eno, in ko jih boste izvlekli, bom Simona prosil, ko bom prišel do konca, za njegov naslednji glasbeni interludi med igro.
A moramo prebrati vprašanje glas?
Ko boste, se pravi,
Da daš bo zelo težko za mene.
ko boste prebrali, vprašanje, ko ga boste prebrali, potem, ko bomo začeli, se še ne šteje v čas. Tako, to je razumno. Če kdo potegne dve vprašanje, ne ironije, ki je bila izpostavljena v zadnjem odgovoru iz prejšnje runde. Spravi, do takrat, ko je avantgarda še smrtno resna, se tako še ne more imenovati. Zdaj sem vam kupil še nekaj časa. Zdaj pa vrstni red, mislim, da ste že nekako se zagreli. Evo, številka 2, številka 11 in tako naprej. Ko preberete vprašanje, poglejte človeka z uro. da ve, kdaj vam začne odmerjati ostanje. Prosim.
Z ozirom na močan razmah nacionalistične politike v današnjih časih. Ali je možno vzgajati občutek pripadnosti brez diskriminacije drugega posameznika? Seveda je, kajti človek, ki je nacionalist, ki druge nima rad, ne more biti svoboden. Tudi samo čista gola poštenost ne zadošča. Marksist, ateist Erich Fromm je dešifriral smisel Jonove knjige o stari zavezi. Je poštenjak Jona, ker pa ne pozna ljubezni, se je za kazen znašel v kitovem žrelu. Marksist je dešifriral eno najlepših izpovedi o tem, kaj je poštenost, kaj je ljubezen v Svetem pismu. Hvala.
Najlepša hvala. Številka 11.
Okay, thank you. It seems that the concept of social plurality bears some resemblance with the notion of ethical relativism. Are these two concepts interchangeable? If not, what would you consider as the main distinction between the two? All right, and it's actually, the two terms are actually...
Microphone.
The two terms are actually completely different. You see, the social plurality, the way is...
Hello.
Yeah,
We didn't
start.
have the mic for the question.
Should I read it again? I did not. Okay. It seems that the concept of social plurality bears some resemblance with the notion of ethical relativism. Are these two concepts interchangeable? If not, what would you consider as the main distinction between the two? Start. I actually think it's quite the opposite. The way I see social plurality, the way I understand it, plurality of the forms of life, as Wittgenstein would say, frameworks, because frameworks, apart existence, as a means of being along together, can be considered as an aim and basically as the status of the responsible politics in a contemporary social world. And the problem with the view of the way, say, ethical relativism is that it cannot recognize the differences. To recognize the difference, you need a common principle, the principle on which you can bind. So if you want to find similar norms, if you want to see what really is different with the other, if you want to tolerate the other, you must have something to judge on. So the terms here are actually coming from a completely different spectrum, from a completely different perspective. So here's the deal. I would say that don't think of these terms as being similar. Social plurality is something that is desired of the different social forms, different cultures, different religions, they all enrich us.
Najlepša hvala. Ja, bom tudi precise, on time. Naslednji, prosim, smo že imeli kakšnega kandidata, pa sem ga jaz pogledal. Številka 6 in potem številka 7.
Okay. So, question. Numerous cases of nationalist and religious fanaticism have been occurring all across the globe. They are oftentimes a direct consequence of either old hatreds, misguided belief systems, or quests for a higher purpose. How does one start an open dialogue after a fanatic occurrence takes place? Is dialogue even possible? End of question. So this question obviously implies that a fanatic occurrence, or whatever this phenomenon is called, is somehow overpowered already. And then we ask a question of dialogue. Before that, we are confronted with a situation where dialogue is probably not possible. Historical illustrations are here, like for instance Nazi Germany, like the state of ISIS or whatever, something like that. So the dialogue which comes after such an occurrence is possible as a legal dialogue like Nuremberg trial.
Številka 7, number 7, and then number 9.
It seems that today we are confronted by a general misuse of traditional ethical concepts such as virtue, duty, and the difference between right and wrong due to their
absorption in popular opinion. In this regard, what type of role does tradition play in times of mass population? Is a return to traditional value possible? If yes, would you consider this a wise step? My answer is simply that we've never left traditional virtues. We think Kantian ethics has its roots in Plato. The Republic gets clout on talking about some options which include what we know today as Kantian ethics. But let me make this one remark, and that is that the word value, which is very important, has a semantic span between the idea of truth, valid, and the notion of courage, that we translate courage by another word, valor. If you look very closely at those three words, they share the same etymology. And therefore, to talk about value is really to talk about that which you can hold, which you believe to be true, and you're prepared to hold with courage. Finish.
Thank you. Številka 5, številka 8.
Vprašanje glasi. Rosa Luxemburg se je svoj čas borila proti vsem oblikam nacionalizma, oportunizma in revizionizma. Lahko bi dejali, da smo danes soočeni s podobnimi sociopolitičnimi fenomeni. Bi se strinjali z dotično trditvijo? Kolikor se strinjate, prosim, podajte primere. Da, se strinjam. Tudi danes smo soočeni z oblikami nacionalizma, oportunizma in revizionizma. Nacionalizem. Najprej bi samo želel poudariti, da moramo razlikovati med nacionalno zavednostjo, se pravi ljubeznijo do svojega naroda, in pa med nacionalnim šovinizmom. Prvo je, po mojem mnenju, absolutno nekaj zaželenega in nekaj, kar primanjkuje, medtem ko nacionalni šovinizem je pa seveda veliko zlo. Žal smo priča tudi danes temu velikemu zlu po celem svetu. V Evropi se brati z raznimi populizmi, ki pa so se vedno bolj prehajajo iz nacionalizma, se pravi to, da Nemci sovražijo Francoze ali pa tako naprej, v kulturni šovinizem, se pravi za drugačne, za ne Evropejce in tako naprej. To je mogoče ena stvar.
Hvala. Did I miss someone or are we at number 8? Was somebody before? I think I and then after number 8 is who?
Okay.
4 and then 9.
V delu Človek v sodobnosti Jaspers zapiše, da ideologiji kot sta nacizem in fašizem predstavljate lažje možnosti za posameznika. Kako razumete to izjavo v odnosu do vidika odprte družbe? Najprej, kaj so to lažje možnosti? To je vse, kar pomeni na kratko beg pred svobodo. Bolj komplicirano je pa beg pred rastočo kompleksnostjo družbenih problemov. Strah pred kompleksnostjo. Iskanje navidezno enostavnih rešitev. Kaj se tiče odprte družbe? Odprta družba je tista, ki spodbuja, motivira in podpira iskanje težjih možnosti. Radostno iskanje težjih možnosti.
Najlepša hvala. Number 4.
So, to condemn means two things. Either an expression of complete disapproval or the act of sentencing, that is, judging someone. In this regard, how do you understand the concept of dialogue without condemnation, seeing that there is always enough space for disapproval? Does dialogue mean an absence of polemic? If not, please elaborate why. I like this question very much. All I want to say is that some truth is to be found in every ideology, every theory, every point of view that has met with some acceptability in society. And it is for me, when I'm dialoguing with it, to sift out that whatever is true, in my opinion, sift out whatever is true. For this, I need to interpret the context. So I don't go only by what he says, what she says, but what she means. And especially the intercultural is very important. Words used to have got different connotations. And besides that, theories must be understood in context. Historical context, cultural context, social context. Very elaborate, need to be developed. And if I differ from you, very often thesis, antithesis, synthesis. We say we Asians by and large, thesis, conthesis. In other words, I don't say you're wrong, but you're not sure. You're right, but can we add this? In other words, add something more, slight edit and so on. So,
It is over. It is a dreaded tool, but there it is. Number 9, please.
How does one include existential concepts such as authenticity in today's society? Secondly, is it possible to be authentic in an open society? I think it's already included, so I don't think we need to worry about how to do it, but we need to worry about how we go about it. Open society is characterized by a flexible structure, freedom of belief, and wide dissemination of information. And I would say that it is absolutely necessary to be genuine, to be authentic, to have an open society that is diverse. I think the best example I can give is from the Nordic countries, where there sometimes emerges an inauthentic mode of thinking, where some people tend to become worried about what we would call it Schrödinger's immigrant. We don't know if he's in there, but he's stealing our jobs. An authentic person is not afraid of Schrödinger's immigrant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next was nobody. Okay, sorry. Številka 3.
Number 3.
Number 3. Yeah. I told you I'm going to be mixing it all the time, so please.
It seems that nowadays we are defined by our opposition regardless of whether it is a matter of an academic or a political dispute. Alternatives, on the other hand, are hard to come by. What would be the cause for this state of affairs? Please give your opinion. Well, first of all, I will talk about opposition as different as contradiction. Opposition has to be understood as a dialectic, and dialectic has its roots in dialogue, or dia, that is two. Plato's dialogue spoke about this. Hegel's dialectic spoke about coming to the other and then united, and this means grow bigger or to evolutionate. Just as a challenge, and the form here, I love it, of the snail, of the natural conch, is like that. It grows from very small to other parts until it becomes whole. That's what I would understand when it's opposition, dialectic, growth.
Thank you very much. We only have 10 and yeah, I think 2 more. 10 and then 1. If we didn't miss anyone. Are we correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you very much. So first 10 and then 1.
The prospect of an open society is undoubtedly a tempting one. However, it may as well represent an unattainable ideal. Would it be fair to say that the idea of an open society is a utopia? What would be your thoughts on this? The open society, what is an open society? I don't really know. Again, we have to do it with an absolute good, with a sovereign good, with an idea, not with the real. Maybe with a master signifier who can stop dialogue. So we are here in an open society. Don't speak such a bullshit. Yeah? Maybe it's a terrible idea. One will not speak. One will try. So, but on the other side, we have to deal with the other aspects of our society. We can't ignore them. And it's not a goal, it's a practice, last but not least. It's, as I said again, up to oneself.
And number one, please.
Okay, thank you. The question is, it seems that most people nowadays search for a sense of belonging in ideas pertaining to nationhood. How would you evaluate this type of searching for belongings? And my answer is that, firstly, if the people, most people searching for belongings, that's the necessary and naturally, because materials is still the foundation for human being for their life. The third is, based on this kind of sense, the people also need to search for their spirit, for their mankind's feeling and moral, and also I think that's the main need and that. The third one is now the people pay more attention to belongings. Actually it's necessary because the economic situation is not good enough. No matter in developing country and advanced country and also developed and advanced country. So, but for society should lead the people to find the balance between these different kind of needs and let the people can really have a whole person development and a whole society development. Thank you very much.
Najlepša hvala vsem govorcem in govorkam, seveda. Simon bo naredil svoj tretji uvod.
Well, they have to share 2 bottles because the number 1 and number 2 is both of you.
Yes, yes. We have to get the second one very soon. Eventually, we'll drink it together.
And the number 3 is Thomas.
So if there is only one third place, we give the third place. Okay? Congratulations. The explanations, maybe here. The explanations follow informally as well as informally.